king. And I love that old cross where the dearest and best for a world of lost sinners was slain. So I'll cherish the old rugged cross till at last I lay down. I will cling to the old rugged cross and exchange it someday for a crown.
Oh, the old rugged cross, so despised by the world, has a wondrous attraction for me. Oh, the dear Lamb of God left his glory above to bear it to dark Calvary. So I'll cherish the old rugged cross till my trophies at last I lay down. I will cling to the old rugged cross and exchange it someday for a crown.
Today we gather to honour and celebrate the life of Alan Keith Brown. Alan, Brownie, Dad, Granddad. He meant different things to different people. To some in this room, he was a workmate who never missed a shift. To others, a trusted union delegate who would stand firm when fairness mattered. To many, he was a friend, warm, steady, and always ready to have a conversation. To our family, he was strength, kindness, and an unwavering moral compass with a passion for V8s and always a cold beer in the fridge. Grief brings us here, and it does not need softening. When someone who has been part of the rhythm of your life is suddenly gone, the silence feels unfamiliar. But today is not only about that silence, it is about filling the space with the sound of who Alan was. The laughter, the country music played just a little too loud, and the roar of V8 engines on a Sunday afternoon, and the steady presence that so many relied on. To understand Alan fully, we need to go back to the beginning. He grew up in Owaka, the only child of a sheep farming family. Farm life does not allow for idleness. As a boy, the mornings began with responsibility, emptying chamber pots before the day properly began, feeding stock, learning early that work was simply just part of living. But there's something about growing up on a farm that shapes the person quietly but permanently. You learn that animals rely on you. You learn that weather does not negotiate. You learn that if a job needs doing, you do it, whether anyone's watching or not. Alan carried that with him his entire life. You may find you also develop an unhealthy obsession with weather barometers, which always had a pride in place at our house, near the front door, and it was tapped and consulted religiously, every day. I don't really miss that weather barometer, but maybe ask me about that in some time. Alan's father passed away in 1975, before many of us had the chance to know him. But from the stories Dad told, it's clear that much of the man he became was shaped in those early years. Strength without show, responsibility without complaint. He developed a lifelong love of animals, something that began in those Owaka paddocks and never really left him. As a shepherd in the sheepyards at Pukuri, Dad had between 10 and 16 dogs at any one time. Did he really need that many? Probably not. But he felt strongly that working each pair of dogs for too long on the metal grating wasn't good for them, so he liked to swap them out quite regularly. Working dogs demand consistency, patience, authority and trust, and Dad had all of those in abundance. He always had a favourite dog, but the one that sticks out to me was Rogue. I'm sure every shepherd has that one dog that just seems to get them. Rogue was that dog for Dad. You could see the pride he had in him. Rogue was a giant woolly thing, as tall as Dad when he stood up on his back feet. For a man who believed in toughness and hard work, he had an enormous capacity for affection when it came to his working dogs. Of course, those working dogs also test your patience. One of my earliest educational experiences happened on the farm when I was only about 3 or 4. I learned to swear fairly fluently, listening to Dad trying to work one of his dogs called Sandy, who was, by all accounts, notoriously independent when it came to following Dad's instructions. The F word featured heavily. Seemingly Sandy was wonderful when Lisa needed to get her to do anything, but for Dad, she had a really strong, stubborn streak. Mum was less than impressed when I wandered back inside the house, confidently repeating what I'd heard echoing across the paddocks. As Alan grew into adulthood, work remained central, but so did family. In 1971, he married Lynette. Together they welcomed 2 children, Barry and Wanda. Through that marriage ended in 1976, it brought into the world 2 people who would always be part of Alan's story. Becoming a father was one of the defining roles of his life. In the late 1970s, he met Joy, and they married in 1981, just a month before I decided to appear on the scene. Years later, I asked them why they decided to get married at all. What was that moment? What prompted it? By this point, Mum was about 7 months pregnant with me. Lisa was 9, and Mum and Lisa were already living with Dad out on the farm. From a practical perspective, life was very much underway. As it turns out, the answer begins in Awaka. One morning, Nana Brown, or Rebe, happened to bump into Nana and Grandad Hughes, Edie and Arthur. And in the way that only small towns can manage, Rebe reportedly asked, "When do you think Alan's going to make a decent woman out of Joy? Because that baby is coming pretty soon." Arthur mentioned that to Dad a few days later, and apparently that was all the prompting he needed. Off Dad went to see the postmaster to ask if he was available the next day, and thankfully he was. So Dad went home, informed Mum that they would be getting married the following day at the post office. And that is what happened. In their wedding photo, Dad looks very pleased with himself. Mum is wearing a beautiful beige dress, sporting a very noticeable 7-month baby bump. And Barry and Lisa are there too, possibly looking slightly unsure how their world was about to change with a new baby about to arrive. There was no grand production, no long engagement, just a decision, a date, and a quiet sense that this is the right thing to do. It was very Alan. When Dad married Mum, he didn't just marry her. He became a father to Lisa. He did what he always did. He showed up, fully, without hesitation. Family to Dad was not technical. It was commitment. And so ours was a blended family, with Dad, Mum, Lisa, Barry, Wanda, and I. And Alan and Joy built a partnership that lasted 41 years, until Mum passed away in April 2023. Their love was not loud, it was lived. Every day Mum made Dad his cups of tea and coffee, and for years I assumed that he loved a good cup of coffee. After Mum passed away, he actually never drank another cup. It turns out he really didn't like coffee at all, but he did love that she made it for him. He was never someone to complain. I don't remember him ever criticising a meal Mum placed in front of him. He would sit down, eat what she prepared, be grateful, and very often go back for a second helping, especially at Christmas. Mum's Christmas cake and pavlova were legendary in our house. The making of them started in October, To be fair to Mum, we did have a number of birthdays in November and December, so being prepared with a pavlova or two in the freezer was just good planning. And Dad could almost eat an entire pavlova on his own. In fact, I think one Christmas he actually did. Their marriage was built on small daily acts, routine, respect, quiet humour, the kind of love that isn't flashy, but is unshakable. When Mum died, Dad had to find his feet again. She had done so much around the house, and yet even as his own health was beginning to decline, he learned. He learned how to cook for himself with the help of a cheap and simple air fryer. He learned how to manage the laundry with barely any issues. He learned the best way to clean the carpet when Alfie, his faithful Shih Tzu, made a mess. He didn't complain, he adapted, because that's what he had always done. In the late 1980s, Mum and Dad made the move from South Otago to North Otago, to Oamaru to be exact, which is where they lived until Dad retired about 10 years ago. For more than 3 decades at the Pukuri Freezing Works, Alan showed up, every shift, every season. In over 30 years, he did not take a single sick day, not because he was chasing any kind of recognition, but because he believed that if people were counting on you, you showed up. As a union delegate, he stood for fairness. He believed that working hard mattered, but also that people deserved respect. He did not look the other way when something was wrong. He didn't wait for someone else to step in. There are people here who remember him walking into difficult conversations without hesitation. Someone always ready for a chat, a beer, some country music, or to talk to at length about motorsport, especially Ford. Those years in Oamaru were spent making new friends and navigating the challenges of ageing parents, and a few Saturday nights at the Oamaru Men's Working Club, solidifying those friendships. When retirement came calling, Alan and Joy chose to head back closer to where it had all began, and they settled in Balclutha, close to Lisa and her family, and back among dear friends that they'd known years earlier. Those retirement years were some of their happiest. There was real comfort in being surrounded by familiar faces again, time for cups of tea, visits, shared stories, and the quiet joy of reconnecting with people who had known them for a long time. And it feels fitting that as we remember Alan today, we do so through the voices of those who loved him most. So now, I'd like to invite my lovely sister Lisa to come forward to share her eulogy for Dad.
First of all, I would like to say that Barry and Wanda were unable to be with us today, but Barry wanted to say that he's going to miss his phone calls with Dad, and he had many of them over the time, and they're unable to join us today. Mum and I moved to the farm with Dad and Barry when I was around 5 years old. Dad and I shared the love of the outdoors, animals, and any way to get away from any inside job that Mum deemed we needed to do. Nothing better than getting on the back of the tractor, or in later years the motorbike, and zooming to somewhere far, far away from her inside jobs. Dad was always a cooler parent when we lived on the farm. If Mum said no, that was code for go ask Dad, and he would normally say, "What did your mother say?" To which we replied, "She said, ask you." Dad loved his animals and was very proud of the animals he produced. But I must add, Dad, one year one of my pet lambs bought a higher price. Dad was very partial to the odd cold beverage, and after consuming a few one night, a friend and I were showing him how we had learnt to do Ford rolls. His reply was, "I can still do that." Hence the crouch, the roll, and then slam. He rolled straight through the dining room, through the kitchen door, and sent the range flying. Mother was not impressed, and when Dad got up, you could see the birds flying around his head. His excuse was he had ear troubles, nothing to do with the beverages. Dad bought a new motorbike for him, and I was allowed to have the old one. When a friend was out visiting, I was allowed the new motorbike. This one was a little higher than mine, and balancing was a bit of an act. But I thought I'd give it a go getting through the gate by opening the gate from the bike and then shooting through. This went very badly. I hit the hay shed and pushed the clutch protector into the bike. Mum and Dad come home from Waka and I had a crowbar trying to straighten it out to no avail. Dad just said, "Give it here, Lou, it'll be okay." Dad was well known for leaving keys in vehicles, and we always went away for 2 weeks in the May school holidays, and Grandad Hughes was left in charge of farm chores. As small town gossip goes, Grandad heard somewhere that farms were being targeted and thefts occurring. So Grandad went out and removed the keys from every vehicle and then proceeded to hide them. When he told Nana what he had done, he said to her, "Whatever you do, don't forget where I put them." There was great fear that no vehicle was going to have a key when we got back, and Dad spent quite a few days replacing the keys into his vehicles. Dad decided us kids needed a pet, and for some unknown reason to me, he decided that pet was going to be an Old English sheepdog. Now, I'm not sure if you know what these dogs are like, but they're not designed to live in the muddy catlands. One year when Wanda was with us for the holidays, she was on the outside toilet. We all knew to shut the door, but she did not. Mufti got in, pulled her jeans off, and then took off at great speed with them around the lawn. Barry and I were dispensed to retrieve them, but now as I know, that dog was in his element. I cannot remember even how we did get them off him. Dad also had a sack of oysters one year and left them at the back door. Mufti stole 2 of them and took them. Dad wasn't concerned at the time, but when Mufti brought them back a week later and brought them inside, he was not popular. But Dad loved that dog. One night Mufti would not be quiet and Mum was concerned he was going to wake us. Dad went out and was comforting him and saying, "It's okay, mate, you'll be fine." Then 2 guys walked round the side of the house. Mufti had heard them coming up the half-K road and was letting us know. Dad thought that Mufti was quite clever then. I didn't agree. One time we were heading to a picnic and Barry was told to let the chickens out. Somehow Mufti got out at the same time. It was Barry, chicken, then Mufti. Dad was not impressed with Mufti that day, but the chickens did lay better after that shake-up. Grandad H was in hospital one time and Dad, Mum and I were at their farmlet with Nana. Now Dad loved a good Dear Karen Kay letter in the New Zealand Women's Weekly, which Nana got weekly. And he was sitting at the table reading through this. Mum looked out to the kitchen window as Nana had let Grandad's dogs out and was feeding them when the gobbler, that had a love-hate relationship with Nana, probably more hate, was puffing out and heading towards Nana. Mum said, "Ellen, do you think we should be helping Mum?" To which Dad just slowly moved the book down and said, "She'll be right, won't she?" I don't think he wanted to go near the gobbler either. Only in recent years have we told Dad the story of our smoking escapades. As many of you all know, my mother was a smoker, and she used to buy her smokes by the carton, as you did in those days. So a friend and I decided we would find out what the smoking caper was all about. Snagged a packet and away we went. But, as most young people, we never thought of the consequences and decided that using our newly built hut in the hay shed was a great place to commence this endeavour. Luckily no hay barns or children were harmed in this experiment, but when I look back, the what-ifs make me shiver. As many farmers in those days, we had possums running amok around the farm and their skins were worth money. In fact, Mum and Dad did the rugby tour with Dad earning money this way. And one night there was a possum in the implement shed. Dad loaded the 22 and went out to get this pesky possum. I think I was holding the torch. He shot it all right, but thought he missed. But the only thing he had was a hole in the back of the implement shed. This was the second one he'd done, as he'd done the shearing shed about 3 nights before. About a week later, we were in the house and heard some rustling in the wash house, and Dad went in, and here was the pesky possum. Possum was taken out, and when he looked at it, it was missing part of his tongue. So he hadn't completely missed, he had just got the tongue. When the grandchildren come along, Grandad was often summoned to meet somewhere so the grandchildren could enjoy a holiday in Oamaru with Mum and Dad. On one particular holiday, when the kids were with Mum and Dad, Mum went out to a meeting and Dad was left in charge. And if you had not guessed it, Dad was not the keep an eye on everything person. When Mum got home, Bradley had covered Daniel's face, who was about 3, in every sticking plaster he could find. Mum asked Dad what he was doing and Dad replied, "Well, Bradley was quiet." Dad was the granddad that would watch Hannah Montana and Lizzie McGuire with Stephanie Ann, and she thought this was awesome. None of us could understand his love of these programs, but Stephanie Ann and him would laugh away at them. When Daniel came along, Granddad moved on to Tom and Jerry. Dad even bought DVDs to have at theirs for him and Daniel to watch. Dad was a Ford man, hence the blue, and our family was Holden, red. And many Bathursts we would be slinging the comments back and forth, and nothing made me happier to ring him after a win and say, nothing like a Holden. As spoken about, Dad had a love of cars, and many cars went through our family, but there was one choice of cars that we never got over, and this was his choice of a Vauxhall Viva for his work car. The name should say it all. When visiting Mum and Dad for a holiday in Oamaru, Dad said to Gary, "Can you take the Viva to the garage? It isn't running right, and it's probably best you take the back roads." That should have been our first hint. I think this is where Dad was laughing on the inside. Gary was the only one who had a licence, so the next day we get in the Viva, Gary and I in the front, Mum and Michelle in the back, heading down the back streets as told. When we came to the intersection, my mother, who hadn't had a licence, started yelling, "Keep going, keep going." There were 4 cars heading towards us. Gary stopped, and next minute, the back 2 doors opened, Mum and Michelle jumped out and started pushing. This was how Dad had been getting around Oamaru. They knew just to jump out if he stopped. I'm sure that Dad was laughing all day at work, thinking of us taking that damn car to the garage. Dad's love of car yards was a well-known pastime, and we often joked that Mum would say no more cars, to which Dad would reply and find many faults with the current car which required the upgrade that he was looking at. When Mum and Dad were in Oamaru and we would go up to stay, Dad would say to Gary, "Want to come feed the dogs?" Which was code for "let's look at the car sales." Dogs would be fed, and then on the way back home, car sales would be stopped at. When Dad would get home, Mum would say, "You've been at the car sales," and Dad would put Gary under the bus by saying, "Oh, Gary wanted to have a look." For over 20 years, we would spend New Year's in Kirrell camping with Mum and Dad and friends. These were treasured memories, but Mum and Dad took ages packing up. Mum took everything, and I mean everything camping. Dad just packed it with the odd grumble. One year we had our tent up when the Brown camping party arrived. Trailers started being unpacked, and then Mum yelled, "Ellen," as only she could. There were no tent pegs. How this was only Dad's fault, I am unsure of, but hence Steve and Bradley were dispatched back to Oamaru to do a pick-up. I am sure they always arrived after us, so they had many hands to put their tent up. Mum and Dad moved back to Balclutha after Dad retired and took up doing most of the gardens at Springfield Street, and often when I would go there, he'd say, "Look what I've planted there." When I would go over, his love of gooseberries was second to none, and the amount of gooseberry sauce him and Mum made over the years would put a lot of commercial operations to shame. I was very lucky to have Mum and Dad in Balclutha when Daniel was ill. He would head over with his iPad to be entertained all day whilst I was at work. Daniel has very special memories of these times spent with Nana and Granddad and his great Nana. After Mum passed away, Dad moved to his little flat in Yarmouth Street with his little mate, Alfie. Alfie, to some of us, was a demon shih tzu who was either happy to see you or you were his worst enemy. But Dad loved that little dog and thought he could do no wrong. Dad loved his little flat and amazed us with how well he adapted after Mum's passing. I must say a big thank you to all his carers, especially Sandra, who over this time enabled Dad to live at home on his own for so long and helped so much when I was away. He really enjoyed seeing you every day. Dad decided in September last year that living on his own had come to an end for him, and this was a really big step for him. When he moved into Homedene, it was with some trepidation, but he fitted in really well and was amazed at how different it was to what he was thinking it was going to be. Dad loved his lunches, but found that his teas were somewhat different to what he had been used to. So then, Daniel and I become his Uber Eats. Most nights would find Daniel and I delivering chicken drumsticks or a piece of sole to Dad. Balclutha Motors takings are going to be down now with the sale of chicken drums to Dad ceasing. To the staff at Home Dean, a big thank you for your care, compassion and laughs you gave Dad and myself in the 6 months he was with you. But my Uber Eats business is now closed. Dad, your unreserved love and care has been something many never get. I'll miss our chats, our laughs. And when I walked into your room on a Monday morning and said, "How's it going?" to which you would reply, "I'm still here." And to which I would reply, "I'm sure Home Dean would have called me." It's something I'm going to miss. These last few days, not heading in with whatever meal you decided, has been tough. Fly high, say hi to Mum, Nana and Granddad. Rest in love, Dad.
Thank you, Lisa. So I would love to invite my lovely niece, Stephanie Ann, who's going to come up and share some of her thoughts and memories from her time with Granddad. So Stephanie Ann, I welcome you up to share your thoughts.
I'm speaking on behalf of myself and my brothers, Bradley and Daniel. We were Alan's grandchildren and want to share some of our favourite memories of him. We have many fond memories of our granddad growing up. A lot of these were from camping in Corral with Nana and Granddad Brown. We went every year over New Year's and always got many treats from Nana and Granddad, which included unlimited Macintosh lollies and as much fizzy drink as we would want. Granddad always enjoyed his time in Corral and could almost always be found parked up on his deck chair with a stubby in hand. Every year in the lead up to Easter, we all got the warehouse pamphlet out and cut out the Easter eggs we wanted from Nana and Granddad. We would then post this to Nana and Granddad's house, and then exactly what we'd want would arrive on Easter. This also extended to birthday and Christmas presents. I can vividly remember begging for a baby born, which my parents did not get me, but Nana and Granddad pulled through and bought me my baby born. We were very spoilt grandchildren. We often went to stay with Nana and Granddad in the holidays. While Granddad was at work, we would be spoilt by Nana with potato chip sandwiches and endless amounts of TV. However, we were always asking when Granddad would be home. When Granddad arrived home, there was always a delay between the garage door opening and going up and Granddad arriving in the living area. Nana always claimed that he had to put his work gear away, and we always thought that must be a lot of work gear. However, Bradley and I discovered that Granddad would always get at least 2 stubbies on board in the garage before he would come upstairs to greet us all and proceed to make out to Nana that he was just opening his first stubby of the evening. As we all went into adulthood, we think Granddad enjoyed us that little bit more, as we could sit down with him and converse all kinds of topics, often over a beer. Granddad especially enjoyed Bradley calling in for a beer and updating him on all the goings-on amongst the farming community. In the last few months, Daniel was Granddad's Uber Eats driver and always enjoyed a yarn about the going-ons of the day when Daniel arrived with Granddad's takeaway choice of the day. For me, Granddad would always save me a New Zealand First pamphlet he received, and he took great pleasure in handing it to me every time I visited. All I have to say, Granddad, is there's going to be one less vote for Winston Peters in November. After Nana passed, Granddad lived the ultimate bachelor life with his wee mate Alfie and enjoyed trips to the T&C and more takeaways in that short time than he had in his entire life. The last few months of Granddad's life were tough, and he is now at peace with Nana.
Thank you so much. If anyone else would like to say any words, we've got some time if anyone would like to come up. I won't try to force anyone into it, but if you do. Oh, there looks like there's a movement on the side there. That's okay. We've got plenty of time. One of my earliest memories of Dad is from when I was around 4 or 5 years old, and I had proudly watered a plant sitting on top of our brand new colour TV. We lived out in the country, as many of you know, and that TV had to be sent to Dunedin to be fixed, which meant weeks without a TV. Mum was understandably quite upset. My siblings were also quite upset. And I was outside on the trampoline, wearing my jacket backwards, zipped up with the hood pulled over my face, trying to disappear. Dad came home from working on the farm and found me there. He asked me what had happened, he listened, and then he comforted me, and he told me it's going to be fine. Actually, what he asked me was, what did Grumpy Mum yell at you for this time? I'm sure he was just as annoyed as everyone else, but in that moment he chose to make sure that I was okay, and that was Dad. Strength that protected and authority that steadied. When we began telling people that Dad had passed away, a pattern appeared almost immediately in the messages that we received. People didn't reach for really complicated descriptions, they reached to the simplest of truths. He was a good man. Such a lovely man. A great guy. A really good sort. And I think that speaks volumes. You'd be hard-pressed to find anyone who could speak a bad word about Alan, and that is something I probably took for granted when I was growing up. But it was reinforced for me in 2011. Mum and Dad decided to make the most of the off-season and drove from Oamaru up to Auckland. While they were there visiting, Steve and I thought we'd take them on a bit of a North Island adventure. So we piled into Steve's car and headed up to Northland, up to Cape Reinga and then to Waitangi. And even there, Dad did what Dad always did. He made friends. He struck up a conversation with one of the tour guides so naturally that we thought that we might end up having to stay there for the night. From there we travelled down to Gisborne to visit some of Dad's cousins. And that was another one of those moments where you realise properly the place someone holds in other people's lives. Listening to his North Island cousins talk about him, how much they loved him, how much they missed him, it was clear Dad wasn't just a cousin to them. He was like another sibling. He belonged. He mattered. He had left warmth behind him there too. That trip also revealed something else about Dad, his patience when it came to Mum. While we were in Gisborne, Mum had found a giant stuffed dice at Harvey Norman. It was truly enormous. She became convinced that we absolutely needed it because one of the dogs could use it, apparently, to help them get up onto the bed at night time. So Dad dutifully bought it, and then he had to sit in the back seat of a Holden Commodore with that giant stuffed dice wedged between him and Mum all the way back to Auckland. That dice made it all the way back to Oamaru, and later it even made it to Balclutha. But to the best of my knowledge, not a single dog ever used that to climb onto a bed. Dad, however, never complained. He just went along with it, because Mum wanted it, and that was enough. Dad loved a great many things, but a few sat pretty firmly near the top of that list. Fried chicken, as you've heard, country music, motorsport, and a good beer. Anytime Mum was away and Dad was in charge, dinner was essentially a foregone conclusion. We're going to be having KFC. It wasn't up for debate. It was Dad's version of responsible meal planning. When he moved to Balclutha, I think one of his genuine concerns was the lack of a local KFC. But he adapted, as he always did. Country fried chicken turned out to be a perfectly acceptable alternative, and it filled the gap quite nicely. As he got older and eating became more of a struggle for him at times, it was often the simple things that still worked. A piece of fried chicken or battered fish, the kind of food that could reliably tempt him when nothing else quite did. Country music was a staple in our house, but even more so in the car. Dad loved a song that caught his ear, and once he decided something was good, he saw absolutely no reason not to enjoy it repeatedly. He was perfectly content to play the same CD over and over again on a road trip, as though the rest of us might eventually become enlightened. Steve still has nightmares about the 3-hour drive from Christchurch to Oamaru, where he got to listen to George Strait live at the Astrodome on repeat. Not a few tracks, the whole thing, again and again and again. But Dad's love of country music did rub off, at least on some of us. We've ended up with a healthy respect and admiration for George Strait, Alan Jackson, Emmylou Harris, and even New Zealand's own Kaylee Bell. Dad did keep up with the times, he just preferred to do it with a good chorus, a steady beat, and the volume turned up a little higher than necessary. And then there was motorsport. Dad didn't just enjoy V8 racing, he was devoted to it. Sundays had a rhythm in our house, and a big part of that rhythm was the sound of V8s roaring around a track somewhere on the television. If he wasn't going to be home, he'd record it, not just to watch later, but to properly watch it later, and he might also re-watch it again. Motorsport wasn't background noise to Dad, it was a good way to focus. He even made it up to Pukekohe a few times to watch the V8 supercars, and he absolutely loved those trips with Gary, Steve, Bradley and Daniel. Real highlights. Though I'm not sure all the drivers loved them quite as much. Steve told me about one day when Dad was lined up for an autograph and decided to ask one of the drivers, David Reynolds, a very complex question about fuel. And the kind of question that suggested Dad had been thinking about it for quite a long time. The driver paused and said something along the lines of, well, you know, I don't actually know. No one's asked me that before. And honestly, I think Dad would have loved that even more than the autograph. He managed to ask something no one else had. In addition to this, there was also the excessive collection of over 300 die-cast model cars. You could never try and touch them and zoom them around the table. That was a crime that would be punished. They were to be admired from afar, normally along with a story or two about how that driver had done in that series. And of course, there was also beer. If you look back through the photos of Dad that we've shared today, or listen to the stories, you can almost tell what era you're in by what he's drinking. In his young days in Owaka, it was Spates, and he wouldn't have been caught dead drinking anything else. In Oamaru, he became a little more price conscious, and it started with some double brown and gradually moved to Tui. And then in retirement, he went a bit posh. Craft beers began appearing, the occasional German or Dutch beer slipped into the mix, quietly adventurous of him. And I've always suspected secretly that he was at least a little proud of my university beer drinking achievements. I was, after all, doing the brown name justice. And because Dad's life deserves more than just a few stories, we're going to share some photos as well, proof and pictures that he got up to plenty. And so they're going to be showed up here in a moment.
Take my nerves and you rattle my brain. Too much love drives a man insane. You broke my will, but what a thrill. Goodness gracious, great balls of fire. I let you love what I thought it was funny. You came along and woo, now honey, I've changed my mind. This love is fine. Goodness gracious, great balls of fire. Kisses, baby. Feels good. Hold me, baby. Well, I want to love you like I love a should. You're fine, so kind. Got to tell this world that you're mine, 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 mine. I chew my nails down and I twiddle my thumb. I'm real nervous, but it sure is fun. Come on, baby. It drives me crazy. And it's just great balls of fire.
Let's go to Lukenbach, Texas, with Waylon and Willie and the boys. This successful life we're living got us feuding like the Hatfields and McCoys. Between Hank Williams' pain songs and Newberry's train songs and Blue Eyes crying in the rain. Out in Lukenbach, Texas, ain't nobody feeling no pain. Eastbound and down, loaded up and trucking. Are we gonna do what they say can't be done? We've got a long way to go and a short time to get there. I'm eastbound, just watch no bandit run. Keep your foot hard on the pedal, son. Texarkana, and we'll bring it back no matter what it takes. Eastbound and down, loaded up and trucking. Are we gonna do what they say can't be done? We've got a long way to go and a short time to get there. I'm eastbound, just watch old bandit run.
It's wonderful seeing so many people here today who loved and cared about Dad. Unfortunately, there are some who couldn't make it today who have sent their condolences to us. So as Lisa said, our brother Barry and his family Joanne, Felix and Dominic, along with our sister Wanda. Dad's cousins from the North Island, Cecil, Marion, Lorraine and Kevin, long-time colleague and friend Roger Grant, and Wendy and Dave Bradfield, who are our dear family friends. Dad was immensely proud of his children and his grandchildren. He said to me more than once in the last 12 months that he must have done something right to have 4 children who'd built good lives, found their own paths, and worked hard in careers they cared about, and then to see grandchildren growing up, each with their own personalities and potential. He didn't say it directly to our faces. That wasn't really his style. It showed in the way he talked about us to other people, in the way he followed what we were doing, in the way he backed us quietly and consistently. Dad was proud of what we'd done, yes, but even more than that, I think he was proud of the kind of people we were becoming. Dad taught me to trust myself and to use my voice. He taught me that I'm allowed to have an opinion and to hold it with strength. But he also taught me that strength without compassion isn't the kind of strength that matters. He expected firmness and warmth, conviction and care. I honestly wouldn't be who I am today without his influence and guidance. I couldn't have asked for a better dad. And whatever the future looks like for all of us, I hope and I believe that he will continue to take real joy in what he helped build. The foundations he laid in us, the lives we're living, and the achievements still ahead, with Dad quietly cheering us on all the way. Dad expected us to be great people, kind, compassionate, to leave warmth behind us. And that warmth extended to his grandchildren, Stephanie Ann, Bradley, Daniel, Felix, and Dominic. As a grandparent, he was someone they could go to, steady, reliable, cheeky, fun, and also a wealth of knowledge about the families in South Otago, so it could be a good source for any local history or gossip. Lisa and I, along with our families, would like to thank you for being here today, and for the kindness, messages, and support you have all shown us since Dad's passing. We would also like to express our sincere thanks to the staff at Home Dean, who cared for Dad over the last 5 months, and to the support workers who helped him maintain his independence after Mum passed. Your care made a real difference to him and to us. After the service today, we warmly invite you to join us in the reception lounge here at Leishman's for light refreshments in honour of Alan. Please stay, share your stories, and if you wish, sign the remembrance book. There will also be an opportunity to leave a donation for St. John, who provided support to Dad over the last few years. When I look around the room today, I see the evidence of a life well lived. Colleagues who trusted him, friends who shared music and conversation, family who was steadied by him, grandchildren who felt safe with him. The engines may be quieter now. The pavlova may need to be shared a little more evenly. The newspapers will still arrive on a Saturday morning, but there will be an empty chair beside them. But the values Alan lived by, fairness, courage, loyalty, warmth, remain. If you ever hear a V8 engine and find yourself smiling, if a George Strait song comes on and you turn it up just a little bit louder, if you unfold the paper on a Saturday morning and take your time reading it, you can think of Alan. or think of Brownie. And remember a man who showed up, stood firm, loved deeply, and left people better for having known him. A life like his isn't measured only in years. It's measured in the people who stand a little steadier because he once stood beside them. Dad, it's now time for you to rest and to rejoin those who've gone before you. Know that wherever you are, our love goes with you. And pallbearers, please.
You can dance every dance with a girl who gives you the eye and let her hold you tight. You can smile every smile for the girl who'd like to treat you right neath the pale moonlight. But don't forget who's taking you home and in whose arms you're gonna be. Oh, darling, say the last dance for me. Oh, I know
And I, in awesome wonder, consider all the works thy hands have made. I see the stars, I hear the rolling thunder, thy power throughout the universe display. Ngā iwi, mā te whakapono, mā te tūmanako, me te aroha. O e nei taonga, te mea nui, o te aroha. Ladies and gentlemen, the three most important things in life, faith, hope, and love. It is with my love that I thank you all for sharing this night with me.
Well, I left Kentucky back in '49 and went to Detroit working on assembly line. The first year they had me putting wheels on Cadillacs. Every day I'd watch them beauties roll by, and sometimes I'd hang my head and cry, 'cause I always wanted me one that was long and black. One day I devised myself a plan that should be the envy of most any man. I'd sneak it out of there in a lunchbox in my hand. Now getting caught meant getting fired, but I figured I'd have it all by the time I retired. I'd have me a car worth at least $100 grand. I'd get it one piece at a time, and it wouldn't cost me a dime. You'll know it's me when I come through your town. I'm gonna ride around in style, I'm gonna drive everybody wild, 'cause I'll have the only one there is around. So the very next day when I punched in with my big lunchbox and with help from my friend, I left that day with a lunchbox full of gears. I've never considered myself a thief, but GM wouldn't miss just one little piece, especially if I strung it out over several years. The first day I got me a fuel pump, and the next day I got me an engine and a trunk. Then I got me a transmission and all the chrome. The little things I could get in my big lunchbox, like nuts and bolts and all four shocks, but the big stuff we snuck out my buddy's mobile home. Now up to now my plan went all right till we tried to put it all together one night, and that's when we noticed that something was definitely wrong. The transmission was a 53 and the motor turned out to be a 73, and when we tried to put in the bolts, all the holes were gone. So we drilled it out so that it would fit, and with a little bit of help from an adapter kit, we had that engine running just like a song. Now the headlights, there was another sight. We had two on the left and one on the right, but when we pulled out the switch, all three of them come on. The back end looked kind of funny too, but we put it together, and when we got through, well, that's when we noticed that we only had one tail fin. About that time, my wife walked out, and I could see in her eyes that she had her doubts, but she opened the door and said, "Honey, take me for a spin." So we drove uptown just to get the tags, and I headed to ride on down Main Drag. I could hear everybody laughing for blocks around. But up there at the courthouse, they didn't laugh, 'cause to type it up, it took the whole staff, and when they got through, the title weighed 60 pounds. I got it one piece at a time, and it didn't cost me a dime. You'll know it's me when I come through your town. I'm gonna ride around in style, I'm gonna drive everybody wild, 'cause I'll have the only one there is around. Yeah, Red Rider, this is the Cottonmouth in the Psycho Billy Cadillac, come on. This is the Cottonmouth, and negatory on the cost of this machine there, Red Rider. You might say I went right up to the factory and picked it up. It's cheaper that way. What model is it? Well, it's a 49, 50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59 automobile. It's a 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 67, 68. Well, you wonder why I always dress in black, why you never see bright colors on my back, and why does my appearance seem to have a somber tone? Well, there's a reason for the things that I have on. I wear the black for the poor and the beaten down, living in the hopeless, hungry side of town. I wear it for the prisoner who has long paid for his crime, but is there because he's a victim of the time. I wear the black for those who've never read or listened to the words that Jesus said about the road to happiness through love and charity. Why, you think he's talking straight to you and me? Well, we're doing mighty fine, I do suppose. in our streak of lightning cars and fancy clothes. But just so we're reminded of the ones who are held back, up front there ought to be a man in black. I wear it for the sick and lonely old, for the reckless ones whose bad trip left them cold. I wear the black in mourning for the lives that could have been. Each week we lose 100 fine young men. And I wear it for the thousands who have died, believing that the Lord was on their side. I wear it for another 100,000 who have died, believing that we all were on their side. Well, there's things that never will be right, I know, and things need changing everywhere you go. But till we start to make a move to make a few things right, you'll never see me wear a suit of white. Oh, I'd love to wear a rainbow every day and tell the world that everything's okay. But I'll try to carry off a little darkness on my back till things are brighter